So this time around, we want to convert the book component to use the composition API instead of the options API. But before we do that, let's just do a little bit of cleanup here in app.vue. So here in the template section, right now we're caching books. And of course we changed that. So that books component will never get cached because it never gets called. This should be books composition, okay? And the other change I want to make is over in books composition.vue. Down here, we're actually setting a property in the state called ready, and we're returning it here, but we're never using it. So let's go back up here. In this div, we'll just put a v-if in here. v-if, and of course, it's just ready, not ready.value. We don't do that when we're testing it. We just use ready. And then we'll find the closing div after that and put a paragraph tag as usual with a v-else and just loading ... Okay, that's a little cleaner. Now let's close this. And the one we actually want to convert is this one, book.vue. And I'll follow the same sort of logic I did last time. Over here in the components folder, I'll create a new file, which I'll call bookcomposition.vue. And I'll copy over the template section. And of course we have to look for this. We'll copy it, go over to book composition, paste it in. And we're going to get rid of this in ready. Is there any other this here? Yes. And I think that's it. Okay, so that's it for that part. Now let's go back and look at book.vue and see if it has any styles. It does not. So we're ready to go over here and create its script section with a closing script. And I'll get rid of all of this stuff that it automatically added for me because that's not the syntax I'm using. Okay, first thing we'll do is import some things. So we're going to use ref, of course, because we have state. And we're also going to use onMounted from Vue. So we have our import. And I'm also going to import useRoot, which you haven't seen yet, but we're going to be using it shortly. And of course, this is for rooting, as the name implies. We're importing that from Vue-router. Because again, the syntax changes a little bit. And we'll add the export default, same as before. Default has to be spelled right. And we'll give it a name. And that's book composition. And it emits potentially an error. And as before, even though we're not using them, we need to put some props in there. I'll just make that empty. Now our setup. So setup with props that we're ignoring, and the context, which we are not, and we'll set up the state. Let ready equal false, ref false. And our image path, const image path equals ref process.onv.app or view app image URL and a book. Let book equal ref an empty object. And finally, we need a const root, and that's going to be equal to the useRoot we imported just a moment ago. And we'll be using that very shortly, and that's a function. So let's give ourselves some room. And we'll have our onMounted lifecycle hook, onMounted. And we use the arrow function. And inside of that, of course, it's going to be the fetch statement that we used over here in book.vue. So let's just copy that. And paste it over here inside of onMounted. And then fix it. We're not going to this.emit, we're going to context.emit. And it's not book equals data, it's book.value. And the same thing for ready. That becomes ready dot value. And I'll get rid of this console log. And while we're at it, we'll add the dot catch as well, just to be safe. Dot catch, error, and use an arrow function, and it just becomes ctx.emit, error, error. Okay, so that's our onMounted, and all we have to do now is return the stuff, our data. So return book, ready, and image path. And that should take care of it for the actual component. So back over to the rooters index file here, and we'll find book and change it to book composition, and change this to book composition, and copy the name and come down here to book singular. Now that becomes book composition, and this is book composition. Okay, let's just go back to book composition.view for a minute. Now, why did I import this use root bit from view router? Well, and we assigned it to a variable here, root. And the reason I did it is because the way that we get root params actually changes. Here in the onMounted function, we have fetch process.on, so on and so forth, from /book/ and then this $root. Well, that's the old syntax. And all we have to do to fix that is get rid of the $sign right up to the beginning of this. And now we have access to that root parameter. And of course, that's what we're using to look up the book from the database. So we have to have that. So if all went according to plan, I should be able to open my terminal, stop the application, just because I made changes to the root, start it again, and now go back to my web browser, and I'll go to the home page, and I'll reload everything to make sure it's current, and then go to books, and then I'll say filter to horror only, and I'll look at The Shining, and click that. That seemed to work. And when I go back to books, because we're properly caching things now, it just shows horror. And that all works as expected. So that's pretty straightforward. Just remember that when you're converting something from the Options API to use the Composition API, if you need to get the params from the view router, you have to use this syntax, which means you have to import useRoot from view router, then create a variable that's assigned the value of useRoot, and then you can call root.params. Whatever your parameter name is. Okay? Let's move on and do a conversion of a component that's actually a form. And we'll use the login form. And once you can do one form, every other form is pretty much the same logic.